The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 was a stunning triumph for England, where Henry V's outnumbered forces shattered the might of the French army against all odds. This victory marked the pinnacle of English power in the Hundred Years' War, but it was far from the end of the struggle. In the wake of Agincourt, France teetered on the edge of collapse, only to find itself poised for an extraordinary resurgence. The latter half of the Hundred Years' War unfolded like a grand drama, filled with cunning diplomacy, treacherous alliances, and a slow yet unstoppable French counterattack that would ultimately turn the tide of history. Henry V, King of England, returned to his home country in late 1415, not just to bask in his glory, but to gather the resources needed for the next phase of his conquest. His ambitions were clear: the complete subjugation of France. In 1417, Henry launched a new campaign, this time targeting Normandy. The conquest was swift and brutal, culminating in the Siege of Rouen, which lasted a year. Meanwhile, France was descending into chaos. The nation was torn apart by the Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War, with the crown itself paralyzed by the madness of Charles VI. The once proud Kingdom of France was crumbling, its future hanging by a thread. In 1420, the Treaty of Troyes was signed. In this agreement, Henry V was officially recognized as the rightful king of England and France, disinheriting the Dauphin, Charles. To cement this, Henry married Catherine of Valois, daughter of the Mad King. Paris fell into English hands that same year. The King of England now possessed the power that his longtime predecessor, Edward III, had always wished to have. The war could have ended here with a triumphant English victory, but it didn't. In 1422, at the height of his power, Henry V suddenly died at the young age of 35 due to dysentery. He left behind a kingdom and a newborn son, Henry VI, who would inherit both the crowns of England and France. The French resistance, though bloodied, was not yet dead. The Battle of Verneuil in 1424 became another test of wills. The Scots, longtime allies of France and foes of England, sent a contingent of 6,000 men to aid the French in battle. But the English, led by the formidable John, Duke of Bedford, crushed them once again in a battle so savage it would later be called the Second Agincourt. The French and Scots were devastated, their hopes dashed once more on the battlefield. The tide, however, would soon begin to turn. The Siege of Orleans in 1429 was the pivot on which the fate of France would turn. The city, the key to the Loire Valley, was besieged by English forces under the command of Thomas Montague, Earl of Salisbury, who died early on, being hit by a cannonball. It still seemed inevitable that Orleans would fall, signaling the end for France. But then, from the ashes of despair, arose an unlikely heroine, Joan of Arc, a simple peasant girl claiming to be guided by divine voices. She had a vision that she was destined to repel the English forces from taking Orleans and crown a new French king. This 17-year-old girl convinced Charles VII, the Dauphin of France, to allow her to lead an army to relieve Orleans. Joan arrived at Orleans on April 29, 1429, bringing supplies and reinforcements. Her presence electrified the French defenders and citizens alike, as they believed she was divinely sent to save the city. Joan immediately went on the offensive. Between May the 4th and May the 7th, 1429, she led several attacks on English-held fortifications surrounding the city, securing the forts of Saint-Loup and Augustin. When attacking Tourelle, a heavily fortified bridgehead on the southern bank of the Loire, Joan herself was wounded by an arrow but returned to rally her troops. Her inspiration led to a fierce assault that captured the Tourelles, effectively breaking the siege. Following the victory at Orléans, Joan and the French forces launched a series of campaigns along the Loire Valley, further eroding English control. The successful reclaiming of several villages and garrisons eventually led to a military engagement at Patay on June 18, 1429, where for the first time the heavy French cavalry managed to surprise a 5,000-strong English longbow contingent, routing it and inflicting heavy casualties. With the Loire Valley secured, Joan persuaded Charles VII to march on Reims, the traditional site of French coronations, deep in English-held territory. The campaign was a daring move, but paid off. The English, demoralized and overstretched, could not mount a strong defense, and Charles VII was crowned at Reims Cathedral on July 17, 1429. The Maid of Orleans was at his side, fulfilling her divine mission. However, she was not treated kindly for it. While defending the town of Compiègne, she was captured by Burgundian forces who were allied with the English. Joan was handed over to the English, who put her on trial for heresy and witchcraft. Despite her unwavering defense, she was convicted and, on May 30, 1431, burned at the stake in Rouen at the age of 19. We will now enter the final phase of this long conflict as we make a time jump. The final years of the war saw the French armies, now better trained and equipped, employ more modern tactics under the leadership of commanders like Jean de Dunois and Arthur de Richemont. English Normandy fell after the Battle of Formigny in 1450, while English Aquitaine was annexed by France after the English loss at Castillon. The capture of Bordeaux in 1453 marked the end of English rule in France, save for the port of Calais. The 100 Years' War, which had begun as a struggle for a crown, ended with England losing all but a foothold on the continent, despite gaining so many startling victories. The war's conclusion in 1453 marked not just the end of English aspirations in France, but the beginning of a new chapter in European history. The conflict had irrevocably altered both nations. France, battered but unbroken, emerged stronger, while England, now mired in its own civil strife, entered the turmoil of the Wars of the Roses.